for dessert, I had a chocolate chip cookie.
Perfect.
And today I've had a cookie, and for dessert, a Diet Coke. So I'm feeling great. Yeah. I didn't have a chance to eat yesterday. The only food I could find in the building was a Twix. But then I taught a class last night, and someone brought cookies. So I said, oh, okay, I'll have that for dessert. So my doctor, I'm sure, is delighted.
But you have a lot of energy.
Yeah, well, I've been eating sugar. מה קורה? מה נשמע?
הכל בסדר?
יופי. מתקדמים?
מתקדמים.
Okay, so hi everyone, good to see you. So, despite the topic, this is not going to be so much of a political discussion. I only put Bibi Netanyahu in the title to get anyone to show up. No.
Especially now what's happening.
What, right now?
With Barras.
Oh yeah. So no, I'm not gonna delve into that. Well, maybe we can. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. Last semester of Beth Am University, I taught a class on Zionism and the formation and the history of Zionism, and looked at some of the philosophers and thinkers about Zionist thought well before the state was established in 1948. And, obviously we're thinking about Herzl and Jabotinsky and some of the other, giants of the state. But not as obvious, maybe, was thinking about Achad Ha'am and Chaim Nachman Bialik. And even though, if you've ever been to Israel, every street is named after Bialik or Jabotinsky or these people, or Pinsker or Katznelson, the founders of the ethos of the state. But I don't necessarily think as much about who was Achad Ha'am and what did he think, and who was Chaim Nachman Bialik and what does he think. We don't think about them as much as we do people like Herzl and Ben-Gurion. But if Herzl would have gotten his way, and there weren't people like Chaim Nachman Bialik and Achad Ha'am, then the official language of Israel today would be German. Or maybe French, because that's what he believed civilized people spoke. And only later on were people like Bialik and ultimately Eliezer Ben Yehuda. You know Ben Yehuda Street? So Ben Yehuda is a person. It's not like Maple or Elk Street or something. It's actually, Ben Yehuda is the actual guy. We actually had here at Beth Am several years ago his granddaughter, the granddaughter of Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Who's Eliezer Ben Yehuda? The guy who invented Hebrew. Well, God invented Hebrew, but he breathed new life into it. He's the one who really started it and wrote the first dictionary. And what does it mean? How do you start a dead language? Well, he had to come up with new ways for nouns that didn't exist before. I'll give you an example. You know how to say air in Hebrew? Air. Like the air we breathe. Avir. It's the first word of your favorite song. Avir harim salul kayayim. It's the first word of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. Avir. Avir harim, the air of the mountains, the Judean hills. Right? So we had the word air biblically. But we didn't have the word for a fan. So he had to come up with, well, how can I make up a word for fan, something that has something to do with air? So, me'avrer. Avir, me'avrer. He created new ways of creating nouns so that you could actually use Hebrew today. And then he redefined how things were conjugated. And he cleared up how to conjugate verbs. And then people were able to start speaking it. So most of the time, most of the Jews were speaking Yiddish. Do you know Golda Meir, even when she first came to Israel, I mean, when it was first Palestine, and she gave a lecture at Hebrew University, she spoke in Yiddish, and she was booed because they said, we're in Israel now, we're done with Yiddish, speak Hebrew, but her Hebrew wasn't good enough yet. Because she grew up in the Ukraine and in Milwaukee with a short stint in Denver. So if you ever listen to Golda Meir speak in Hebrew, she has no Israeli accent. You know, it's not like listening to, same thing with Bibi actually. When I listen to Bibi speak in Hebrew, it's simple to understand. If you listen to someone like Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid, it's a little harder for me because of the accent. But Bibi spent so many of his formidable years at MIT and in Philadelphia that his English he can speak with no accent, and it makes it a lot easier for an American to understand. So these guys, why am I bringing them up, and what do they have to do with what I want to focus on today, and especially what do they have to do with Prime Minister Netanyahu and what's going on today? Well, they were the ones who created the fabric of Judaism that would make up the state, listen closely, for the non-Orthodox world. Now, the Orthodox had their own thing. The Orthodox still in Israel, you know, if they're ultra-Orthodox, they still do things the way that their great-grandparents did in Ukraine, in Poland, in whatever godforsaken place they came from. You know, my great-grandfather was born in Romania. And when he was 7 years old, I think, 6 or 7 years old, his mother died in childbirth with his younger brother. And he was adopted by his aunt. And his aunt was super Orthodox, like ultra-Orthodox. And she wanted him to have a really Orthodox education. So she said, well, where can I go? And she said, I can go to Palestine. And it had nothing to do with Zionism. She didn't care about Zionism. She just wanted somewhere to go where he could get an Orthodox education. Well, she went, moved to Jerusalem, and enrolled my great-grandfather in the yeshiva of a guy named Rav Kook. You know who Rav Kook is? He's a chef. Yeah, I'll be here all week, guys. Have any of you heard of Rav Kook? Okay, from my class. Okay, so Rav Kook, Avraham HaKohen Kook, Avraham Kook HaKohen, was the first chief rabbi of the British Mandatory Palestine on the Ashkenazic side. He came from the Ukraine. He was trained in the Harvard of yeshivas, which was the Volozhin, well, let's not say Harvard anymore, the Tulane of yeshivas. Right? That's where my daughter goes. I don't think they had as much fun at the Volozhin yeshiva in Lithuania as they do at Tulane, but it was the best yeshiva in the world. And all of the greats were coming out of this yeshiva. It was run by this guy named Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, but this is where the Soloveitchik family came from. This is where Chaim Nachman Bialik was studying, and this is where Rav Kook was studying. So ultra-Orthodox. Rav Kook came to Israel, and he was so popular and so brilliant that he became the chief rabbi of Jaffa, and then ultimately became the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Mandatory Palestine. He died in 1936. Well, the ultra-Orthodox saw coming into Israel all of these refugees between 1880 and 1920 who were fleeing from the pogroms of Eastern Europe, and a lot of them were secular. Right? A lot of them wanted to live on kibbutzes. A lot of them wanted to put Judaism as far behind as they could and, you know, have these like socialist secular communes and build kibbutzes. Now, some of them were Orthodox too, and that was great for them. But the ultra-Orthodox saw these other people coming and said, ugh, they don't even care about Judaism. They don't keep Shabbos. They don't do anything. But they had a problem. Because they looked at these kibbutzniks who were coming, And what were the kibbutzniks doing? They were building the nation of Israel. They were defending the nation of Israel. They were paying for the nation of Israel. You know, there's a joke in Israel. In Israel, a third of the Israelis go to the army, a third of the Israelis work, and a third of the Israelis pay taxes. It's all the same third. Yeah. The other 2/3, collect checks, study Torah, call it a day. Although that's kind of what I do, so I shouldn't. I shouldn't be. But I do Tat Shabbat. Well, I used to. Now I have someone else do it. But yeah, I mean, it used to be a great rabbi. You had to know the whole Torah, the whole Talmud by heart, all 7,200 pages. And you had to know it all. And you had to be able to talk about any of it. And if anyone came before you for a judgment, you had to be able to say, it says in the Talmud, now you have to be good at Tat Shabbat and say hi to people after services. So it's the rabbinates changed a little bit. You don't have to know so much, but if you're good, all right, it doesn't matter. Bim Bam has replaced Nazikin. Okay. So people like Rav Kook, who are developing the ultra-Orthodox fabric of what ultimately is going to be the state of Israel that we know today, are on the sidelines living their life, building nothing, contributing nothing, except to the Torah world, which is a lot. But they're not helping to build the country. And they're not defending the country. In the meantime, there are these other people building cities and defending the country and putting an army together and developing institutions. And the ultra-Orthodox look at them and say, ugh. And Rav Kook is the only one who looks at them and says, these are the seeds of the Messiah. Because what the original Messiah is supposed to be is two forms. The original Mashiach is supposed to be the Mashiach ben David. We learned about this in Torah study, some of us. But Mashiach ben David is the first coming of the Messiah that's going to take the Jews back to Israel and rebuild the country. The second Messiah is the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is more spiritual, which will bring the Judaism to everybody. And so Rav Kook looks at them and says, wow, these people are bringing they're bringing the seeds of the Messianic era to the land of Israel, and we have to embrace them. And the ultra-Orthodox hated him for that. But if he wasn't, by the time they hated him for that, he was so popular and so important that they couldn't excommunicate him, and he had already risen to very important heights and had a lot of followers. But to the end of his days, he had a lot of detractors because he accepted the non-Orthodox. But he gave a beautiful eulogy, and it was just called The Eulogy. And he read it in Jaffa, but he didn't say who it was about. And it was just like a eulogy of someone who died in a poem that he wrote. And it was about someone who brings the birth of the Messianic era, but doesn't really understand the Torah part of it. And you know who he wrote that eulogy for? Right after he died? Theodore Herzl. You know how many Orthodox rabbis were eulogizing Theodore Herzl? 0. 1. Rav Kook. Because he got it. So now he dies, 1936. And over the next 12 years, Israel's founded in 1948. And there are competing ideologies. You have what they call Orthodox and what they call Chiloni. Have you ever heard this word Chiloni? The Chiloni in Hebrew means secular. In Israel, you're not Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox, or nothing. You're Orthodox, or you're secular. Right? Now, there are different types of Orthodoxy. You could be ultra-Orthodox, you could be modern Orthodox, you could be Hasidic, you could be Kabbalistic. There are all kinds of different things. One time, I was on a tour of Israel, and it was a synagogue tour from when I was in Fort Myers, and the guide was Orthodox. But he was modern Orthodox. Wore shorts. I mean, he looked like a normal person. He wore yarmulke. Other than that, he looked normal. I heard, you ever listen to that comedian Modi? Yes. He just told a joke. You know what Bedikat Chametz is? Searching for Chametz. So what we do is, before Pesach starts, I'm sure all of you did this, You walk around your house with a feather and a spoon, and you look for any chametz and you put in the spoon, and then you hide bread, and then the kids find it. So Modi just told this joke. He said, I have these neighbors who are Christian. They're in their backyard, and they're searching for an egg. And they have this whole holiday. They built this whole holiday around searching for an egg. And this is, and I don't want to say anything, but it's so bizarre. We would never do anything like that. You know what we do? We get a feather and a spoon and walk around in the dark looking for bread that we hid. So before we castigate them, we got some weird stuff ourselves. Maybe it's funnier when I don't know. He tells the same joke. Everyone goes crazy, and I tell it, and it's like, it's okay. Yeah, it's all the timing, I guess. I forget why I even told that story. It was a tangent off of the tangent. Okay. Chiloni it means secular, but it comes from the Hebrew word halal. Halal in Hebrew means space. Chiloni means like nothingness. That's what they call, I'm secular. So like, you either observe it or you don't. But they don't have Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox. So you're either Orthodox or you're secular, but the synagogue you don't go to is Orthodox. There are some people who go to Reform and Conservative synagogues, but it's 13% of the Jews in Israel. It's pretty small. It's hopefully growing, but it's been hopefully growing for a long time. And it's not growing so fast. In fact, I don't really see it hardly growing at all, except in a couple of places. And I want to talk about why and see what you think about it. To be chiloni, if you say to an Israeli, you're secular, you're the same as me, I'm a Reformed Jew. In practice, yes. In a lot of times, they're even a fair bit less observant than we are. A lot of Israeli Chiloni Jews don't go to shul on the high holy days. My cousins in Tel Aviv don't go to shul on the high holy days. It's like a day off. They go to the beach. They don't fast. But then they look at me and say, how can you call yourself a rabbi? You're Reformed. So how could that be? What I want to try to explain today is how that can be. Because in order to understand the mindset of Bibi, you have to understand this. Now, I have a friend who overheard Bibi say to someone, now I'm telling you this third hand, but this is what my friend told me. He's a rabbi, so he only lies most of the time. But this is what he said. I was at an event, and I heard Bibi talking to someone who was telling Bibi that he was going to become a rabbi, and he was going to become a Reform rabbi. And Bibi responded to him, if you want to be a rabbi, why don't you just be a real rabbi and become an Orthodox rabbi? Now, here's a guy who's not Orthodox. Doesn't wear yarmulke, except when he does, which is rare. Doesn't really keep kosher, except when he's in public. Doesn't go to shul on Shabbos. I doubt he's got the feather and the wooden spoon. I doubt he hides the bread and then finds it. I doubt he puts on tefillin every morning. No, I do. But why doesn't he? So, now let's try to figure out why. Because the assumption that I had been making for all of my rabbinic career until I taught this class at Beth Am University, I think was wrong. Because what I learned when I was preparing to teach that class was something different. So here's what I think. What Chaim Nachum Bialik and Achad Ha'am were two guys who grew up ultra-Orthodox in the Ukraine. And as they grew up and went to yeshiva and were very learned in Talmud, they decided, We love being Jewish. We want to be Jewish, but we also want to relate to the outside world. And they were influenced by the Enlightenment, the Haskalah that had been taking place in the 17 and 1800s. And what the Enlightenment really was in Europe was Christians looking at the world and saying, you could figure out how to be moral and live a moral life without the Bible. And no one had ever, that was heresy. No one had ever thought like that before in Europe. No Christian had ever thought like that in over 2,000 years. And they started to say, let's investigate ways to live morally without necessarily and completely going according to the Bible. And once you say that, you can let non-Christians into your society. And that's when emancipation happened and Jews started to come into society. The problem with that, though, well, maybe for the good or the bad, Jews also started to say, we can be good people without the Torah. We can come up with morality and ethical behavior on our own. We don't only have to go by the Torah. So how I treat somebody and what I do in my business is way more important than if I put cheese on my burger. But what happened was, and when you do something like this, you dilute from the ethical the spiritual. We have mitzvahs. Some are for ethical and spiritual reasons. Ethical and moral reasons, which is pretty much the same thing. And some are for spiritual reasons. When you light Shabbos candles, there's nothing ethical or moral. You're not doing anyone any favors. You're not supposed to use the light to see. That's against Jewish law. You're not allowed to use the light to warm yourselves. That's against Jewish law. It's a spiritual act. So you could say, then why do it? It's just spiritual. We're looking for ethical moral. So what happened was you had Christians and Jews now starting to say, we don't need your religious dogma to figure out how to be good people. And Jews started looking at that, and it affected people like Bialik, and it affected people like Echad Ha'am, who said, we still love being Jewish, but we don't have to be so orthodox, so crazed about it, that we can't connect with the outside world, because the outside world has good stuff to teach too. You could become oral method from other stuff. Okay. That being said, they were Zionist. And they believed in the idea of creating a new country. But they said, if you're going to create a new country, and it's not going to have this Jewish fabric and this culture to it, why bother? And Herzl had never thought like that until he talked to these guys. Because Herzl said, who cares? They're slaughtering us in the streets of the Ukraine. They don't want us in Paris. They hate us everywhere. Let's just go to Israel. And when they said, we can't go to Israel yet, maybe we'll just go to Uganda, Herzl said, fine. We'll go to Uganda until we can get to Israel, but we got to get out of Europe because they're about to slaughter us there, which, by the way, he was 100% right. They did. And do you know, in 1903, when he took the question to the Zionist Congress, and they voted on whether or not they should go to Uganda, the World Zionist Congress, which I'm running for, 100 years later, 120-some years later. Do you know how the vote went for Uganda? They voted for it. They voted for going to Uganda. Now, turned out a few weeks later, the Africans said, we don't want you here either. So, shocker. But even before that happened, when they voted against Uganda, half of the delegation walked out and said, we don't want anything to do with this. And who was it? The Russians, the Eastern Europeaners. And Herzl couldn't believe it because he said, you're the ones who are most in danger. You're where the pogroms are. We need to get you out of there. And they said, it's Israel or nothing. Because that's Jewish. And Bialik and Echad Ha'am came out of that world. It's got to be Israel. And if we go to Israel, Herzl, it can't be speaking German. We've got to speak our language, and it can't even be Yiddish. It's got to be Hebrew. So they started to develop this idea, and listen closely, this is called the difference between cultural Zionism and religious Zionism. Rav Kook was a religious Zionist. What did that mean? It meant up until that point, Judaism believed it's not okay to go to Israel. You're not allowed to make aliyah until the Messiah comes, and we're not going back. Rav Kook came along and said, no, things have changed. Because what the Zionists are doing is making the Bible come alive. The predictions of the Bible are coming alive. Because what did the Bible say when the Messiah comes? If you read through the prophets, Zechariah, Ezekiel, what do they say? The land will bloom again. Jews will come from the four corners of the earth. The nations of the earth will agree. Israel won't revolt against the rest of the world. And all of that stuff happened. Right? In the UN, November 29th, 1947, the world voted in favor. Let the Jews go back. They said just a partition. The Jews can't have it all. Jews didn't revolt. The land started to bloom again. Jews came from the four corners of the earth. And Rav Kook said, this is what the Bible's supposed to say. It's unbelievable. This is actually happening. The rest of the ultra-Orthodox world to this day says, no, it didn't. In fact, there's some really crazy ones who are anti-Israel. The Neturei Karta and the Satmars and nuts. So as Israel is being built, from the time that Rav Kook dies in 1936, and people like Achad Ha'am and Eliezer ben Yehuda and Chaim Nachman Bialik win the day. How do we know they win the day? Because look at the language that was being spoken in Israel at the time. It was in Hebrew. Look at the theaters that came about. It was all based on even to this day. When you hear Israeli rock stars and the music that's coming out today, you often hear biblical verses in their songs. A lot of them. Sometimes some of the biggest hits. There's a guy right now, Moshe Ben Ari. He's one of the biggest Israeli rock stars, sort of like a reggae, Ethiopian influence. He's got, the dreadlocks and all. And he's got a hit song on Esa Einai. Yeah, really? It's a song. It's one of the Psalms. That's on the charts right now in Israel. How could that be? Why would that be? Because the culture that was born into the state, that said the state had to be Jewish or else what's the point, won the day. And that's called cultural Zionism. So if you grow up in Israel and you're secular, this is what you grew up with. What does that mean? What does that mean in practice? It means that there are mitzvahs that you do, and there's mitzvahs that you don't do. But if you do them, you do it the Orthodox way. You do it the right way. So it's kind of like saying, this is how Israelis view it. It's obviously not how I view it. I'm a Reform rabbi, but this is how they view it. If you're going to go to, let's say you were going to go to a baseball game, and you had a choice. Say you lived in a city where they had AA, AAA, and major leagues. You say, okay, what do I want to go to tonight? You go to the major leagues, the best one. That's how they look at Judaism. Okay, we need to have a bar mitzvah. There's Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Let's go to Orthodox. Because they've been taught their whole lives to believe that that's the only one that's real. And so that's where they go. So cultural Zionism, even though it's not Orthodox, Judaism, in this whole thing of cultural Zionism, Judaism is one component of it. But in that component, the Judaism that's in there is Orthodox. That's the official way. That's how it was from day one. Now, one of the other problems is, on day one, 1948, us Reform and Conservative Jews, we weren't there. So we didn't get a say. And who was there? The Orthodox rabbis. And they had a very compelling case. And they went to Ben Gurion and they made their case. And what was their case? Their case was almost all the major rabbis in the world were just slaughtered in the Holocaust. And if you don't help us restart the Torah world here in Israel, there will be no Torah world. Ben Gurion was a classic cultural Zionist. He didn't have a great use for rabbis. He loved Bible. He knew the Bible by heart, but he wasn't into the Talmud. Although he did know, my great-grandfather actually used to study Talmud with Ben Gurion. That's a different story. He was into it, but he wasn't a scholar of it. He said, okay, fine. What am I going to say no to these guys? You want to? There were no reform or conservative. There were the only rabbis in the country. They said, fine, you want to handle the Judaism? You rabbis handle the Judaism. And that's all anyone knew. People coming from Hungary and Latvia and Iraq and all these places, there didn't know reform conservative Judaism. So reform and conservative Judaism in Israel already lost before we even started playing. The orthodoxy was already baked in before we even got to the table. And the only way that anyone knew what to do in their Judaism was... Now, here's the irony. It took my cousins in Israel a while to get what I was doing. Once they came to Beth Am and they saw this place, they said, wow, you're doing something. When they came to Fort Myers, they're like, the hell are you doing? Yeah. They're like, because they would see me, and I would show up at their house in Israel, and I'm wearing shorts and a T-shirt, and they'd say, yeah, Rabbi. Yeah. Because to them, a rabbi is the long beard, the big black coat. I remember the first time this happened to me. I was going to Israel, I think with Artza, on an Artza mission. I show up at the airport. I was in Charlotte at the time when I was an assistant rabbi. I show up at the airport. I'm wearing shorts and a golf shirt. I've got a hat. I got my headphones on. And the security guard, I guess Artza booked the ticket, which is the reform wing of the Israel movement. And so on the ticket it said, when I book a ticket, I don't write Rabbi Jeremy, but they wrote Rabbi. So this guard looks at me. He's like, and this is when I had hair, so I looked, I looked like a kid. This is a long time ago. He's like, oh, Rabbi. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I think we got a security problem over here. Get this kid out of here. I was like, ask me about the Torah portion. But to them, that's what a rabbi is. They don't have much use for it, except when they do. But when they do want to get married, why would they go to a reform rabbi that they don't understand what it's about? They've been taught their whole life that it's not kosher, and it won't be counted by the government. So they go to an Orthodox rabbi who they have no relationship with, whose shul is at the corner of their block, who they've never met because they don't even go on the high holy days. They go have a ceremony with him. It's the most impersonal, ridiculous thing ever. And they say, okay, that was great. Why would I go down the street to the reform one where the rabbi will give me all the time in the world and teach me and get to know me and spend time with me? I have to pay for it, and it won't count in the government. There's no chance. This is the world that Bibi grew up in. That you don't necessarily observe it, but if you did, that's the way you would do it. So there was this skit in Israel on TV about, they have Yom HaHava. It's like Israeli Valentine's Day. So in Israel, for the mitzvahs, you either keep them or you don't. And, say it's just about, you ever been in an Israeli hotel on Shabbos with the Shabbos elevators? So, stops on every floor, so you don't have to press the button. Because chas v'shalom, you should, press the button, the whole world's thrown off its kilter. But so let's say it's Friday, the sun's about to go down, or maybe the sun already has gone down, and you're an Orthodox guy. You're dressed Orthodox, and you're about to get on the elevator and press the button, and someone will come up to you and say, don't do it, Shabbos has started. You say, oh, thank you for telling me. But, if you're just in shorts and a T-shirt and you don't look Orthodox and you go to press it, they're not going to stop you. Because you can tell who keeps the mitzvahs and who doesn't. So there was this skit on one of their shows on Valentine's Day, which they call their Valentine's Day, Yom HaAhava. This couple walks into this beautiful restaurant, and they sit down, and they're about to have a romantic meal, and right next to them is a table, a couple fighting with each other. And they have candy and flowers, and they're all into it, and they're fighting, like ready to kill each other. So finally, they're like, finally the man leans over and says, hey, I know you're upset, but Come on, it's Valentine's Day. And the woman says, oh yeah, we don't observe that. Yeah. It's only funny, if you're in Israel, but but you either observe it or you don't. Now, that being said, it would be a huge scandal if Netanyahu was visiting Miami and he was coming to see, say he was going to meet a senator or the governor, and they're going to go out to dinner, and they go to Joe's. And he's got the bib, and he's breaking the... He could lose his job. That would be a huge scandal in Israel if he was caught in a non-kosher restaurant. He doesn't keep kosher in private. He's admitted it. But in public, if he would do that, he could lose his job because his coalition depends on the Orthodox parties. If Naftali Bennett did it, Naftali Bennett's Orthodox, so he wouldn't do it. But if Yair Lapid did it, okay, it's no big deal. His coalition's not dependent on the Orthodox, most likely, so he could probably get it. But Bibi's third of his coalition's ultra-Orthodox. They'd walk out. So what a scandal. Why? He doesn't. He would be the one that presses the button on the thing, and they'd say, oh, let him go. Who cares? So this is the world that he grew up in. Now here's the crux of the issue that I really wanted to get to. I always thought, with this World Zionist Congress, what we're trying to do is fight for the rights of Reform and conservative Jews in Israel. It's personal for me because my wife converted with a Reform rabbi. It's personal for me because the state of Israel in the Ministry of Interior doesn't consider my wife and kids Jewish. They're Jewish, trust me. But my wife converted by a Reform rabbi, so they don't count it. So it's a very personal thing, and that's why I'm running for this. But here's what I always thought, and I didn't understand. Well, I think now that I was wrong, or I didn't understand it until I started to learn about Bialik and Echad Ha'am. Because remember, what I said about Bialik and Echad Ha'am is the nation doesn't have to be Orthodox, but it has to be Jewish. And in order for it to be Jewish, the Jewish institutions have to be official. Now, the people don't have to follow the laws so strictly, but when they do, when you have the official institutions of the state, they've got to be legitimate. And that meant that Israelis, especially Sabras, who were born in Israel, and it was the first Israeli prime minister to be born in Israel was Rabin. There haven't been many of them. Rabin was, I think. Sharon was not. Barak was. Naftali Bennett was. Yair Lapid was. And Bibi was. But, in the early days, they all came from, Ukraine or Milwaukee. One from Milwaukee. Their belief in the way that they grew up is when we go to shul, which is rare, it's got to be Orthodox. So I always thought that when I go to Israel and I see on Shabbat Israelis at the beach wearing next to nothing, with tattoos, eating shrimp, that they're Reform Jews. If they were American, they would be Reform Jews. Because in practice, they're pretty darn similar. They love being Jewish. When I go to my cousin's house for Shabbat, when I lived in Israel for my first year of HUC, I would go every Shabbat to my cousin's home, and I loved it. And they were not religious at all, but they would light the candles, they would take the yarmulkes out of the drawer, and they would do the full kiddush. I'm saying, why do you guys even bother? You're so not religious. You don't even, you eat on Yom Kippur. Bless you. Because they really do care. And one of the reasons they don't do that much is because they're so beaten down by the Orthodox who always tell them how horrible they are as Jews that they're just like, ugh, it's enough already. But when they do it, and they like doing it, they do it the Orthodox way. So when I go to someone on the beach in Tel Aviv, or someone who's, getting a tattoo while eating shrimp on Yom Kippur, and say to them, why do you think I'm not a real Jew? Look at you. In practice, they're the same as us. But up here, they've been so programmed to think that our brand of Judaism isn't real because of all the things they've been taught. The primary thing that they've been taught is that the only reason we exist is so that we can marry non-Jews. That's what they've been taught. That's the only reason that we exist. Not to mention we were here for like 100 years before intermarriage was even allowed. Although, to be honest, in the 30s and 40s, how many Christians wanted to marry a Jew? There wasn't much intermarriage. Now, for whatever reason, this is how you know there's not that much anti-Semitism. They actually want to marry us. 50% of us are marrying non-Jews. If they hated us that much, it would be a lot lower, like it used to be, right? So they don't all hate us because half of them are marrying us. But they think that that's what Reform Judaism is. It's a way for you American Jews to fit in and assimilate into the Christian world. And that's not us. We're the Chaim Nachman Bialiks. We're the Achad Ha'ams, who we may not be Orthodox, but when we do Judaism, we do it right, and you guys don't do it right. Now, they don't know the first thing about what we do. They don't have a clue what we do. 99% of them have never been in a Reform shul. And when they do come, they usually think it's pretty neat. You know what happens? You know what they do? A lot of times when they come visit, they'll come and they'll say, this was great. I love this. I would never come back because it's not real, but it was great. That's what they say. In order for it to be real, it's got to be over there and really boring, and I can't sit with my family, and I hate it. That's what I like. So I got to go to Chabad. And Israelis almost always go to Chabad. But they don't get it. So here's the problem. All this time we've been waiting for the masses of secular Jews in Israel to realize that they're Reform or maybe conservative, and they're not coming. And we look at them in practice and say, we're the same. We love being Jewish, you love being Jewish, but none of us want to be Orthodox. We're the same. And we look identical. And they look at us and say, not really. Not really. Now, there's one other thing that they have that we don't. And this they hold over our head. And it's partially true. Well, there's two things they have that they do that we don't. And there's truth to it. One, they defend the country. And their belief is by fighting in the Israeli army and defending the country, that's Jewish. It's hard to argue with. They put their lives on the line for the state of Israel, to send their kids to Gaza, to these horrible places. That's Jewish. You guys don't do that. Okay, it's hard to argue with that. We go to AIPAC, but it's not the same. But the other thing that they do is they have Judaism baked into their schedule. And because of that, they know a lot more about Judaism. Just by living in Israel, you get a lot more Judaism, right? Because when we have Purim here, hardly anyone comes. You do Purim in Israel, everyone hears the Megillah being read, everyone dresses up, not because they care that much and really want to connect to the spirituality of Mordecai and Esther, because it's fun. But it's also what you do. And one of the things that Chaim Nachman Bialik and Achad Ha'am said is, if you're going to have Israel, the weekend has to be Shabbat. It's got to be Friday, Saturday. Sunday's got to be a regular work day. Because we have to bake Shabbat into so they don't work on Shabbat. They, go to use electricity, go to soccer games, go to the movies, whatever, but they don't work on Shabbat. We don't really either. But they prepare for it. You know what you see on every corner in Jerusalem on Shabbat? Every corner. Flowers. Everyone buys flowers for Shabbat. It's what you do. And when you walk through the streets of Jerusalem, not every apartment, there are plenty of apartments where they're not doing anything, but you can hear Shabbos songs at tables. It's beautiful. We don't have that. I mean, it may be in Aventura. Aventura is Ira Kodesh, maybe, okay, but most of America, we don't have it. We don't have Reform and Conservative Jews doing that in big numbers. We don't have shows about Purim and Hanukkah on TV at that time of year. We don't. I think now we have one XM radio has one Hanukkah channel, that plays Adam Sandler, over and over again. But their whole movies, everything, it's all about Hanukkah, it's all about Purim, it's all about Pesach. They have it baked in, and we don't. And so for those reasons, they feel more Jewish than us. And I don't think it's true, although I do think the Israelis know more about Judaism than we do, just because, as a whole, I know a lot more about Judaism than a lot of Israelis, but as a whole, they know more about it because of the way that the country has been set up. But they don't, our brand of Judaism just does not resonate with them, even though they're secular. And I haven't figured out a way to communicate with them. I'll tell you, I'll close with one story, and then very interested to hear any reactions or whatever you think or where we can go. But there was a group of Jews, teens from a nifty group, like a Reformed Jewish group, and they went to Israel, and they had a mifgash, which is like a meeting, like a get-together with an Israeli youth group. And they all had dinner together. And when the dinner was over, the nifty kids wanted to do the Birkat HaMazon, the benching. Right? Rabotai nevarech, yehish. And the Israeli kids were like, what are they doing? They didn't, because they never do that. But the Israeli kids heard it and understood the words. So they knew what they were singing. So the Israeli kids don't do the Birkat HaMazon and don't really even know what it is, but they know what it means. The Americans do it, but don't know what it means. So here you have two groups of people looking at each other like, what are you doing? So there's significant cultural differences between. By the way, just by the fact that you speak Hebrew means you know more about Judaism. There's a lot of Judaism baked into the language. So you just know more. Like, how do you say to atone? Everyone in Israel will tell you, lechaper. What's lechaper? What's the gerund of lechaper? Kippur. To atone. So there's a lot of it, things you just know, terms you just know. What's Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av. So it might take us a minute, but they know it because they speak Hebrew. Yeah. So anyway, I think in the final analysis, this is why we can say that a guy like Netanyahu, who's completely, almost completely secular, has no respect for our movement and continues to, make life more difficult for us, and it's very unpleasant. I will say, the one guy who's made an effort to get to know us is Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett is the only person in history of the state of Israel to serve as prime minister and be Orthodox. The only Orthodox prime minister Israel's ever had. The only prime minister in Israeli history that wears a yarmulke. Only one ever. But he has made an effort to get to know all Jews. And his worldview is that all Jews are vital. And so long as these Orthodox parties and Likud continue to look at our Judaism and say it's not real, they can't say that they care about all Jews. And they're missing out a big piece. That's why I like Naftali Bennett, because I think he actually gets it and wants to bring us all together. So anyway, that's where he comes from. He comes out of the school of nationalist, secular, state Judaism, which for non-Orthodox Jews means the cultural Judaism that you have today, where you're not Orthodox, but the synagogue you don't go to is Orthodox. And that's the problem that we have right now. We're not communicating with each other to explain where each of us are coming from. That's why we're having so many problems getting a real strong foothold for Reform and Conservative Judaism in Israel. Because in the final analysis, more Israelis would be more connected to Judaism if they could get into Reform and Conservative synagogues, because even though they want the Orthodox synagogues, when they need to be sanctioned and feel like they're doing it the right way, they don't like going there that much, because in their core, they're not Orthodox, just like Bialik and Achat Ha'am. Okay, that's it. That's my presentation. So thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Happy to hear any comments, reactions, thoughts. Ian, please.
How did they accept all the money, all the support, and are they aware that the contributions we make to our financial and our support of Israel?
So here's the conversation. I've had this conversation with Rick Jacobs many times. Rick Jacobs says to Bibi Netanyahu, you get so much money for us, and you're not letting women daven at the wall, you're not recognizing our conversions, all these things. And Bibi said, that's right, I agree with you. Well, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. Why not? Because if I do, my coalition falls apart, and I'm the only one who can save Israel. And if I give you Jews to daven at the Western Wall, I'm going to lose my coalition and we're going to lose the war. That's the conversation. And Rick is basically looking at him like, I'd rather slam my head into a wall than keep having this conversation, because we're not getting anywhere. And we've been having that conversation with him for 25 years. No.
There's so many things he said. When I came here to the States, I didn't think of myself as Jewish. I became Jewish in the United States.
Wow.
I actually didn't know much about Judaism. I knew much about the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
because it's taught, but not as a religious book. It was taught as archaeology, history, stories, just,
Mm-hmm.
like, so that's number one. So I don't think that Israelis know that much about Judaism.
Okay.
They know about, some of the minhagim and all of that, but basically about Judaism, that's secular. The other thing is, I think that in Israel, the Israelis are.
Can you speak a little?
Yeah. Israelis are, they don't differentiate between Judaism, the nationality of being Israeli, and the religion of being Jewish.
Right.
In the United States, you do.
Yeah. So she said, by the way, this is how it is in most of the world. She said, they don't differentiate between Jewish and Israeli. Although I will tell you that many people after October 7th said, this supports what you're saying, but it's changed since October 7th. A lot of people in Israel said, I went to bed October 6th as an Israeli, and I woke up October 7th as a Jew. October 7th changed things a little bit, but you're right, that's kind of how and honestly, that's why we haven't been accepted in Europe. Because to be French is to be Christian. To be Russian is to be Christian. To be German is to be Christian. And if you're Jewish, you can't be, in a lot of people's minds, those religions. Yeah, 100%. There's only one prime minister of Israel who ever really identified in any way with the reform movement. Anyone know who it is? Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid. He wasn't prime. He was only. I don't blame you. He was only president for like 6 months, or 2 months, but 6 weeks. But his father was Tommy Lapid, and Tommy Lapid was a member of Knesset, and he was a pretty well-known member. He's known for really being an anti-religious party. He had a party called Shinui, which means change, and he wanted to really get religion out of politics. That was his thing. And Tommy Lapid was a Holocaust survivor. He was in Auschwitz. And Yair Lapid started going to shul at Beit Daniel, which is the Reformed synagogue in Tel Aviv. And one day he said, in Auschwitz, my father lost Judaism, and at Beit Daniel, I found it. That's an Israeli prime minister. Pretty incredible.
Were there any other examples of an ancient language being made to be a modern language?
Not really.
I mean, it's quite a feat.
Yeah.
Obviously, so many words didn't exist. You know, the old thing, airplane,
Right.
automobile, train, all that.
No one's ever come back to a country they've been kicked out of. We've done it twice. And brought the language back. And created the internet and everything else. So, and every medicine, known to man.
Don't you think that because Israel basically was organized from the bottom up, started the holidays, the Jewish stuff was baked into it, you say, because in the United States, except for Christmas and Easter, our holidays, our federal holidays are, I guess you Labor Day, Memorial Day.
Yeah, of course.
You would see a sukkah when we went, Sukkot, every little fire escape had something out there. Here, everybody's got lights on the house.
Yeah.
Or rabbits running around the front or anything like that. Depends how the country starts.
It's true, and it's very controversial, because in Judaism, according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to make up new holidays, according to Jewish law. So the Orthodox won't observe Yom HaAtzmaut. Now, the modern will, some of them, but the ultra-Orthodox won't observe Yom HaShoah. They say, we observe Yom HaShoah, but on Tisha B'Av. We don't do it, we won't do it. And do you know David Schachter, who's one of my heroes? He's a Holocaust survivor. He once met the Rabbi. He told me the story. He met the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he went up to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he said, I'm mad at you. He said, why are you mad at me? He said, because you don't observe Yom HaShoah. And he said, the Rebbe tried to give him some excuse about Tisha B'Av and stuff, but chutzpah, but who's going to tell David Schachter? He's the greatest. But they don't observe it. So when Israel started making new holidays, it was very controversial.
Again, can there be a cultural, patriotic holiday which is not a religious holiday?
Yeah, Yom HaZikaron is.
So the majority of Israelis support that.
Yeah, Yom HaShoah too is not religious. They do. The ultra-Orthodox won't, which is a disgrace. How you not commemorate Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron? They won't do it. Rav Kook would have. You know, the religion. So, the settlers, who some of them are just lunatics, like, Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Smotrich came out yesterday and said, the hostages aren't the most important thing. I mean, even if you think that, it's like the Larry David of politicians. Like, you don't say it? Are you crazy? Because we only care about security, and if we make any concessions to Hamas, he's a lunatic. I mean, he's so far to the right. We've never had people this far right in Israeli politics. I mean, they're kahanists. Literally, they're crazy. And I'm right-wing on Israel, but these guys are from a different planet. But those guys are ultra Zionists. So they love Yom HaZikaron. They love Yom HaAtzmaut. And they're very Orthodox, but more of a modern type of Orthodox than the ultra. But their politics are way radical.
It was easy to be Jewish in New York.
Yeah, I would think so.
Shows, we had our icons, the Goldbergs.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody watched the Goldbergs. Everybody knew what Judaism was culturally.
Yeah, I mean, we have a different culture, but we've had a massive impact on American culture. But it's still just a sliver of American culture. Israeli culture is like 100% Jewish. You know. So, and it's so small, and they all know each other, you know, and they all dated, and yeah. Other comments.
I remember when I went to Israel in college, the first time, and I spent a whole summer. And I thought, boy, it would be really easy to keep kosher and keep Shabbat and everything if I lived in Israel because it's built into the life.
Simple. All the grocery stores are kosher. They have to be by law.
By, so just by being there.
Right.
And here you really have to go out of your way and all the other forces that pull you out of it. They say, oh, just like when I was in San Francisco for the first time, I said, I could be vegetarian here.
You
Just everywhere.
but Israel in a lot of ways is like America in terms of the polarization. You know, America is becoming more and more polarized, and Israel is too. You saw it before. Now, October 7th brought everyone back together for a moment. But you saw before October 7th how polarized the country was. And the people who kind of have the Netanyahu traditional Sabra Zionist worldview want things to be like they used to be in terms of culture, not the economy and that stuff, but in terms of culture. And they had a respect for Judaism, even if they didn't follow it. So you might see a tattoo parlor in Tel Aviv, but you would never see it in Jerusalem. You might be able to get shrimp in Tel Aviv, but you could never get it in Jerusalem. Now, tattoo parlors all over Ben Yehuda Street. You can get non-kosher, shellfish and stuff all over Jerusalem. And it's becoming more and more, the ones who are on the left are going more to the left. The same way we are here. Everyone's running to the fringes. And it's tearing America and Israel apart together in the same way. My philosophy is everyone needs to be in the middle where we can talk to each other and act normal. But it scares me. And I remember the first time I saw a tattoo parlor in Jerusalem, I was like, wow, what? This never could have happened. How is this possible? And by the way, almost every Israeli has a tattoo. If you're not Orthodox, you have a tattoo. They're everywhere. But then on the other hand, the tattoo will be Shema Yisrael. So it's like, what? But you know what that's called? You know what's called Shema Yisrael on tattoo? Reform Judaism. That's reform. So you see what you're doing there? Oh, no, I hate reform. I would never go to reform. I'd tattoo my dog's face on my arm, but I would never go into a reform synagogue. Right?
But I'll tell you this much in terms of support for the reform. I grew up very conservative. And so 3 million years ago when I came to Miami and I was shoe shopping as to where I tried different flavors and see what fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to tell you when I said to or whoever it was at the time, I have learned more about Judaism in the reform movement than I ever did in the conservative or the Orthodox environment because things were just done and you were not part of the conversation. And there was not an opportunity, especially for women, to have a role and a presence in the study and the participation that we have. So, and this person said, oh, but I go to Africa. I said, I go to shul every when do you go down there?
Never.
Again,
Yeah.
we're here, we're present, we participate, we're present, and the people, like what you're talking about, like the Israelis, they have the right core, but it's not in their observances as much as we do, and it's such an irony.
Yeah.
if you want to say.
So I think we as Reform and conservative Jews have a lot to offer Israelis. But somehow we're just not connecting the right way with them in explaining how we can and we need to work on that. And it's a very hard thing. Trying to reason with Israelis is also.
Yeah, so they come from a place of a lot of arrogance
Yeah.
because they're there.
Sure.
They are in the front.
Of course.
Okay. But
Right.
I was going to say that I've seen secular Israelis, they'll say the Shehecheyanu, they'll put their hand on their head.
Yeah.
So ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Like, what is that about?
So yeah, I don't know. All right, so I guess I just want to let you all know that on Thursday it's Yom HaShoah, and we have a special program in the hub with a survivor who's going to be interviewed. So if you want to join us for that, we also have Yom HaZikaron program, and we're hosting the citywide Yom HaAtzmaut program. I don't remember all the dates and times, but they're all in the commentator and online, and you should come if you're interested. So thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.